Welcome to Wisdom for Life, where we sift through philosophy to find practical advice that you can use in your everyday life. Hi, I'm Dan Hayes. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Greg Sadler, and today we're going to be talking about
being caught in the gaze and some of the philosophical, psychological, film theory, all sorts of other theory things about what it means to have somebody else looking at you. And there's a lot of implications to this. It was right after we recorded our last session that Dan and I were kicking around ideas, and I remember you said, I want to talk about Jean-Paul Sartre and the gaze. And I was like, well, that's kind of out of left field, but that sounds pretty cool to talk about, because as it turns out, as we're going to talk, I'll relate to you. Sartre used to be my favorite philosopher a long time ago, and I spent a lot of time thinking through this stuff. So I was actually very happy to hear you say that you wanted to talk about that. And I'm still left wondering a little bit, well, why? What brought that up? Was there something on your mind at that point in time that made you steer in that existentialist direction?
Well, we do this podcast / YouTube video and radio show, and we look at each other, and so there's always, once we're on camera and we can see ourselves, there's that gaze effect upon ourselves, as well as we're putting ourselves out there. But also, I see it in interactions in day to day. I think one of the main things that I see, especially from certain people, we'll get into it really significantly, but is the male gaze and the reduction of people, especially females, to kind of this facticity and this desire motive as this kind of physical or sexual object, and not as a individual themselves, and how we turn these individuals into these objects or these means to our own kind of desired ends, and not having them at all be their own subjects, to not have them be ends in themselves.
It's interesting when you think about it. So Jean-Paul Sartre talks about the gaze, right? His lifelong partner from college onward, Simone de Beauvoir, is a major existentialist figure who completed some of the work that Sartre himself didn't do. And she writes about feminism extensively in The Second Sex, not using the term the gaze, but unpacking it a bit. And you think about those two as lovers. I mean, Sartre is kind of harder to think about because he was not a good looker. He must have had one hell of a personality, and in some ways, right, when you compare him to anybody else, like Albert Camus or people like that on the scene. But these people were together for decades, and when you think about the things that they say about the gaze and about sexuality and about relationships, it makes you wonder what their own relationship must have been like, living out these realities that they're analyzing. That, or at least it makes me think about that a good bit. Have you ever has that ever been on your mind? I mean, now it's stuck in your head, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To a certain extent, I definitely have not thought about it as much as you have. But yeah, both the Second Sex as an individual work, as well as just the extent of existentialism, leads to these questions of how one interacts not only with oneself and society, but with the people that they are closest to.
Yeah, that's very important. It's not something merely abstract that you do in the classroom. You're right. The people that you are closest to, whether they're your friends and family or your neighbors, or for many of us, our coworkers, that's where the real test of practical philosophy comes out, isn't it?
Right. Are you going to actually act in accordance with the things that you've come to accept as the best way of moving forward and interacting with those other people.
Yeah. So I want to say a little bit about Sartre and about this this book, Being and Nothingness, because it's a big, thick tome, and that's where we find this really interesting discussion of the gaze, or the look in French, le regard, that comes out of it. It can be translated either way. And it's a very dense tome, right? Sartre has a great facility for developing examples, some of which we're going to talk about, like, the gaze coming from the farmhouse on the hill where a sniper might be waiting for you to walk out into the field. It's very concrete, right? Very easy to relate to and wrap your head around. Or the famous example, which we won't analyze here, but the waiter who is being too much of a waiter, which you can see today in coffee shops and cafes and restaurants here in the Milwaukee area, because there's still people playing that game. But his analyses are, on the one hand, very deep and technical and metaphysical, and on the other hand, they're focused on the things that we have in everyday life that we can relate to. And I think that's part of what makes this book still, it's over half a century old. Actually, it's more than, it's I think over 70 years old now, right? Isn't it? Maybe. And actually 80 perhaps, right? Is it 41, I think? So, but it's still fresh. Some of the terminology, like, what you do in a cafe has changed a little bit. He talks about, a phonograph needle or something like that.
Yeah.
We know what that is, but maybe some of our younger listeners, unless they're audiophiles.
Hey, you know what? Vinyl is coming back. It's been the most selling it has in like at least 20 years. Oh,
really? That's kind of cool to know. Yeah. In any case, this book for me, when I was a young man, was, I won't say my Bible, but I treated it with a similar kind of reverence that some people do. And I was, for a while, trying to live as an existentialist and a Sartrean existentialist. I was captivated by this. I can't claim that I actually understood everything that he said at that point in my career and development, but I thought there was a lot to this, and I connected it together with Simone de Beauvoir, and I filled in some parts with some other existentialist thinkers as well. And these analyses really kept. I remember where I sat in the library reading these and saying, wow, this is amazing stuff, back when I was 20, 21, 22 years old.
Yeah, it's when you first are exposed to these ideals, it really is a major deviation from how most of us are presented the world. And once you are presented in this way, that seems both alien but also exceedingly salient.
Yeah, and exciting.
Yeah, right? that whole like, oh, this moment of like little explosions of enlightenment as you go through this is like, oh, that's such a different way to look at that, but it also makes so much sense.
Yeah, that's actually a great topic that applies to. Well, it applies to practical philosophy. It also applies to reading great literature. Sometimes history can provoke that sort of thing. Anthropological studies, when you find out how somebody else lives and how their language is differently oriented. There's this word that was coined by, I think, structural linguistics people quite a while back, called defamiliarization. And it's used to describe exactly that process. You're sitting there, it could be reading a book, it could be like listening to somebody explain something, it could be having a culinary experience that is kind of mind-blowing, and suddenly a whole world opens up, and it's an unfamiliar world, which could be scary, could be exciting, could be all sorts of things, but it's to use that old expression, you're definitely not in Kansas anymore.
Right. And to some people, these are exciting experiences, and to some people, these are really kind of frightening experiences.
Yeah.
And part of it is how willing you are to be open to those new experiences and new ways of looking at someone. And you can either, kind of regress and go, well, I don't like, Caribbean food or whatever food that you've tried because it's weird and it's unfamiliar, or you can take that jump, that leap, into that new experience and start to experience that as a whole new world that you can live in.
And eventually it does become a world that you're familiar with. And it can also become boring and mundane, right? You've been there, done that too much, but this is how we expand our lives. And so this is a great lead in to talking about the look, because the look has to do with the other. And part of what happens, let's take the culinary, example. You go to a restaurant with one of your friends, and let's say it's a diner. Actually, we'll make it really American, really straightforward. You always order the same thing. Like for me, my go-to in diners is a patty melt with fries and then a bowl of chili that I can dip the fries into. And I like that, it's very homey. It's got all the different things that I am kind of into, but I'll also try other stuff. If I see something cool that's a special, I'll be, that sounds kind of nice. But let's say I'm the kind of person who's really stuck with my regular thing, what do we call that? Your usual, right?
Yeah.
So you and I are at the diner, and you're like, "Hey, have you tried this thing?" And you
tried eggs with kimchi.
Well, that's a good one. Yeah. Now that's I've had that, but I've had it pretty late in my life. It's not something that I stumbled my way into, right? Where did you have it? What was the experience for you?
I don't know if I've actually had directly eggs with kimchi, but I've had there used to be a little restaurant on the east side here in Milwaukee that had a kimchi bowl as a part of their diner breakfast.
Yeah, interesting. So you say, hey, why don't you try this? I like it, and I could say no to it. I'm going to stick with what I know that I like. And then I never have that experience, that possible experience. And when I do have it, I might feel that it really is weird and foreign to me, because who would associate those two things together? Eggs, that's fine with bacon, or what are other vegetable things?
Hash browns.
Exactly. Yeah. Not kimchi,
Right.
Kimchi.
What is kimchi?
Kimchi is only for Korean food, right?
Yeah, right.
But if I do lend myself to it, then I can have this unfolding of experience, and I can have it because you have said this is a possibility. You've opened up my world a little bit. It's not just me looking at stuff on my phone, which is also others, I mean, the words and pictures didn't just get there by, at least at this point, by some AI putting them there, right? Maybe there's another conversation to have about that down the line. But so the other plays a really central role. And, when I try that eggs with kimchi, I can go off by myself and not be in front of you while I'm doing it, so that my facial expression doesn't betray my unfamiliarity or my joy or my anguish or anything like that. If I am doing it in front of you, you're seeing me eating,
right,
and tasting and doing this very human activity, and I'm in a certain way subject to you. Mm-hmm. Right? You could say, what's wrong with you? What's that look on your face about?
I'm going to take this in a slightly different way, because when I was younger, I made a couple of stupid student films, of which one was a mashup of Macbeth and Monty Python's Holy Grail.
Oh wow!
And so I showed this to my father, and I edited the film. I've seen it a number of times. I don't need to watch it anymore.
Yeah.
And I sat there and just watched him, and I noticed that he was watching me watching him, and being aware of me watching him, and Like, what are you gonna do? It's like your child is sitting here. He has worked on something, spent a lot of time on it, and is waiting for your like either eventual approval or disapproval. And no longer can you, as the father, like be totally objective and do the thing, but you are now being watched in this like the dynamic of father and child in a piece of thing, and so it's muddled and it's not any more pure because you are now being that object of viewing.
Now, did you also have the experience of like maybe being a little bit nervous about showing it to him because, you know, you felt it was cool up until that point, and then you do show it to him and you're like, holy crap, that's me on there. And I don't know if he's going to like it or not.
I actually hadn't really thought about that one. I was interested in his reaction, but I wasn't too worried that much about that reaction.
Yeah.
And partly because I had already shown it to a number of people who enjoyed it. And I guess I wasn't too wrapped up in the specific approval of my father.
Yeah, but you could have been. Right?
I could have been, absolutely.
So I got to ask before we go on, does this film still exist out there somewhere, like on the internet?
I do have a copy of it, but it's not on the internet currently.
Okay. I took part in a it wasn't a student production. It was a bunch of us professors, and it was at Fayetteville State University when the director of communications had gotten his hands on some cameras and like a studio and stuff like that. And they were like expanding, and he wanted to create, I don't exactly remember what the movie was about. All I remember is I had a scene where I walked in and shot the chair of another department. And then we took his body and put it somewhere. I'm very hazy on all the details. And so they gave me like a fake gun, and they used some really horrible special effects in the editing to try to make blood, and make something like a gunshot. And so I went in, and I don't remember why I was supposed to be, pressuring him, but I didn't get what I wanted, and so I pulled a gun and shot him. And I walked in the way I normally walk, and I don't really pay attention to how I walk, but I was being video recorded. And later on, my now wife, then fiance, said as she was watching this YouTube clip, she's like, "Wow, you really walk thuggish." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "I mean, you had it down perfect for that scene." And I was like, "Well, I wasn't trying to walk thuggish. I was just walking the way I walk." And then I started getting a little bit self-conscious after that about, looking at myself. How do I walk? And it's because of, old injuries, like, one of my ankles is a little bit shot and stuff like that. I mean, I think there's lots and lots of examples of like revealing who we are when we're actually being recorded or looked at, or however we want to put it.
Yeah. Was it you being watched as an individual, or is it you being like kind of unconsciously being method in your acting there?
No, I was actually just trying to get the scene done.
Okay.
It just so happened that the way my body works made me appear to be that way, And
so did you become self-conscious when Andy said this to you?
Yeah, I started looking at how I walked. And actually, this does illustrate, your question does illustrate something. So whenever we have, let's call it a presentation, something that can be interpreted by another person, something that can be looked at, it's always ambiguous in the sense that, we would like things to be one way. So I'm, I get up in front of my class and I'm teaching, and I'm going to be a professor now. And, this is a serious business, although we'll joke around at appropriate points, and usually that works for me in the classroom. But I've seen some people who walk into the classroom and it is just chaos. The students don't respond to them or respect them. And it's a very different situation. And you can see them trying to put something out there that the other people are in effect rejecting or replacing with with something different, right? And aging has also shown me the older you get, I'm finding the less people pay attention to you, which is kind of nice sometimes, right? You can easily slip by. Nobody's looking at you and trying to size you up or anything. But we're always caught in this play of like, I want to be seen this way. Other people want to see you a different way. And we can't control how other people view us or what
Right.
interpretations they put onto us.
And so maybe we should talk about being objects,
Yeah.
the view of others. So, would you? We've got this thing: being seen by another is an irreducible fact that cannot be deduced from the other as object or by my being as subject. I was hoping that you would elaborate on those terms.
Yeah. So being seen by another is just what it is. It's another person having me in their gaze. But the way that Sartre in Being and Nothingness is using the gaze, it's not just an experience. It's a structure of our existence, and it's always there. Whether somebody's looking at us or not, it's always potentially there. And we can, when we're looking at other people, like I'm looking at you on a screen right now, you're existing as an object for me with a bunch of properties, but you're also not just an object, because if you were, you would be a mannequin or a robot, or you could be a computer generated image. And if I think you're just a computer generated image, like an NPC in a video game or something like that, unless I perceive that intentionality, that agency in a certain sense coming from you, which isn't there in any of the stuff I'm looking at. It's not there in your eyeballs. It's not there in your shirt. It's not there in any of that sort of stuff. It's a structure of our way of being in the world that we grasp some things as having, whatever you want to call it, a soul, a spirit, a mind, an intention. And we can be wrong too. Like we can walk into, I used to have this experience when I was working security at Lakeland College, second shift. I was the second shift commander. And the worst thing was having to go into the theater because you'd have to patrol the whole area. And they had this room way up on top. And it was where they kept clothes and I don't know, all the accoutrements that go with stuff. But they had mannequins in there and it was dark. And you'd walk in there and it was so creepy because even though you would tell yourself, okay, these are just mannequins, if you've seen enough horror movies or shows, mannequins sometimes come to life, and it's hard to keep yourself from not projecting that out there onto them, even though cognitively these are just mannequins. These are just wood or plastic or whatever they are, right? So this is something, we look at the other as an object, and we also understand ourselves as subjects, but this is all reversible. Mm-hmm. So I look at you, you're looking at me. There's like a song that goes like that. I don't remember what the song is, but the fact that I can see you as another person means that I can be swept up in your gaze.
Right.
And objectified myself.
And now you are aware of my own subjectivity because you are aware that I see you as a potential object, and in order for that to be true, I would have to be a subject myself.
Yeah. And the way that Sartre describes it is quite interesting. He says that another person reorients the world. He describes it like, he's usually pretty pessimistic about this. The other person is like a hole that's sucking being into that spot. Right. But there's something to that. Like you're doing your own thing. Think about the workplace, right? You're doing your own thing on your computer, and you're lost in your work, and then suddenly somebody comes behind you and they're talking over you at your shoulder about what operation you should do instead of the way that you're doing things on the keyboard. And suddenly it's no longer just like your computer, your keyboard, your world. That object, even though you're the one still in charge with your fingers on the keyboard, has been, in a certain sense, contaminated by the other person coming in and messing around, right? And even when they're gone, they're still kind of looking over your shoulder, right, in your head.
They've usurped part of your, like, I don't know, your equanimity in doing the things that you want to do with your own self and your own, I guess, workspace or objects in this example.
Yeah. So, another thing that Sartre says that I think is really kind of fascinating and is important is that the look is not in the eyeballs. So he actually, I think, goes too far with this. He says, if I look at your eyeballs and I appreciate them as eyeballs, I can't perceive the gaze coming at me. And I think he's probably wrong about that. But it isn't just in the eyes, because you could be turned around and I could be not facing you and still think you're looking at me. Mm-hmm. Or to use the example that he has about the farmhouse during war, that farmhouse up on the hill, it could be vacant, but it could also be where a sentry is posted and they are watching me. And within a minute, they're going to be calling down artillery on my position or shooting at me with a rifle or who knows what else, heading around to capture me.
You could extend it to, like, any sense in which I am perceiving you as an object, and so just hearing you, with our expanded
sensorium, you could call it.
Yeah, of technology.
Oh, right.
Now we have a whole new plethora of abilities to sense people. We might present that as visual data on a screen, but that is, like, from senses that are beyond our natural ability, but we're still, like, perceiving these things in a way that is not directly through the eyeball. And even, like, you're think of being in the dark with your lover partner, and you can't really see it, like, say it's pitch dark, but you're still perceiving this person through touch and whatnot.
Well, and you could still actually worry about what you look like in the dark.
Mm-hmm. or what you feel like. Yeah.
To talk about technological things, we could expand this and say the look is not in the camera. It's mediated through the camera. Like when your webcam goes on and you see that whatever color light it is, like on mine, it's a green light because I have Apple stuff. It might be a different color on others.
Mine's blue. It's
telling you something's looking at you, right? And you, whether anybody's on the other end or not, it can be a little disconcerting. I mean, that's why people put up fake security cameras.
Right.
Because it doesn't even have to be a genuine look. You can just make people think that they're being watched.
Yeah, are we jumping the gun to Foucault here? Or?
Well, do you want to jump down to that, talking about this panopticon concept, and we'll come back to some of the other stuff as we go on? I mean, this is for our society. This is really a key idea.
Yeah, sure. Let's jump. So we're talking about surveillance society to a certain, well, not to a certain extent. This is exactly what we're talking about. And so, like, I'm most familiar with Michel Foucault's working of his panopticon from Discipline and Punish.
Mm-hmm.
And so the panopticon is described as a prison in which there are circular floors and an open, like, mezzanine, all the floors are in mezzanines, and they are overlooked by a central pillar that has a viewing port for the guards, and the guards can look out of this port and into any one of the cells at any one time. But the slats are designed in such a way that they can look out, but the prisoners cannot look in. And so not only are the prisoners could be viewed at any moment, but even if they are not, they have the perception of always being watched because they never
Right,
know
right.
when they are not being watched.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea here is that we have a system in which the people are self-policing because they don't know if they are being watched or not.
Yeah.
And I think he also talks about this as like religions often use the idea of a all-seeing God as a panopticon to maintain certain societal norms and making sure people follow the rules.
Yeah, Foucault was less concerned about that in particular, the religious aspect, and much more about what happens in our own society as we adopt these sort of features, right? And what's interesting, so in the original Panopticon, it's Jeremy Bentham, the great utilitarian philosopher, who comes up with the plan and actually suggests it as a prison reform that he wants to see in England. He is very angry about the fact that they rejected it and attributed it to the aristocrats wanting to keep things back in the Dark Ages and, basically keep things the way they were. And it was intended not to be something just to like look at people to screw with them or make them neurotic, which it did, unfortunately. But to, like you said, to get them to self-police. So you get a criminal to not only quit being criminal because they don't want to get punished, but to start policing themselves, right? So this is quite an idea. And Bentham also had something else built into it that I think often gets lost. And it goes back to the old question with Plato's Republic, who will guard the guardians? Right. So Bentham's answer is that it will be public officials who will be watching these guards because, if you know some prison guards, you know that they will sometimes abuse power and just mess with people to mess with people. So you have to have some watchers of the watchers and then public opinion. So Bentham imagined like back in his day, they didn't have TV or anything, but you would like have tours and people could come through and watch what the guards are doing. So the watchers are being watched while they watch the watchees, you could say. And the few places where this was tried, it did not have the effects that Bentham thought it would. In fact, it made people very paranoid. It made them compliant, but it also tended to deform the personality. Now, Foucault says we don't actually have to have prisons where things are set up this way. We can have, like you said, a disciplinary society. Bentham, by the way, didn't just think that this should apply to prisons. He thought it should apply to workshops where people are. Imagine like, you're working in the factory and somebody's watching you all the time.
Which is just horrible for me because I do significantly worse
when people are watching
at my job while someone is watching me, especially if like someone is watching with a critical eye.
Yeah.
Like if I have a colleague and we're working on something together, that's fine. But if I have like a boss that is looming and watching and judging, and then all of a sudden like I can't turn a screwdriver correct.
It's a what they call a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? You're being watched just in case you screw up, and it makes you more likely to screw up.
Right.
So workhouses, hospitals, you don't want people messing around with their bandages or, you don't want people doing things they're not supposed to do off in the dark corners. Schools. Bentham thought this could be okay for schools. And so coming back to the disciplinary society, if we think about workers, right, what are the biggest complaints about some of the places where people can get jobs and have to, endure a lot of watching? You have to be monitored in terms of GPS or how often you take a bathroom break or how fast you're getting things done. And it really, really makes for an unpleasant work experience. Places like Amazon, for example,
right,
have, been in the news because of that. I would say that is part of the disciplinary society, the way Foucault is talking about, in the workplace or in schools. My kids have so much data on them when we were young, I can't speak for Dan because Dan is a bit younger than me. There was always this threat of this is going to go into your permanent record, and it would be something that would be typed or written down and go into like a folder, and you could probably go and physically destroy it if you got your hands on it. And then computers came in, and maybe your permanent record would be in the computer. Now there's like tons and tons and tons of data about these kids and what's going on with them in school, in some schools.
And not just like schools, because we now live in an age where we all have like cameras in our pockets, and we have social media and the ability to post this stuff. And I don't know about you, but I did some stupid things when I was a teenager that I am very much happy that I don't have any tangible record of it, because we were all dumb when we were teenagers.
I first got onto social media when I was around 40, and it's probably a good thing that I waited that long in my life.
And also, like, on a mild tangent, I think there's, I'm happy that I didn't have it, but I don't also think that people are going to stop caring, especially as the people that grew up with that as part of their lives become the adults. And so I think the only place where it's a particular issue is the people that grew up without it having positions of power and judging those who did have it, because now they can say, like, I don't have any of this, but you do, and so I can kind of like tut you without actually having any of this own available to put down my own self. Yeah,
I mean, I kind of think that some of the people who didn't grow up with the internet and social media, not all of them. I mean, I'm in that group myself, but many are really terrible at understanding and using it. And I also think that the younger generations are also, on the large part, pretty terrible in using it and understanding it as well, just in different ways, I mean, you think about the stuff that we do post and the fact that it's out there now forever, and anybody can look at it. Anybody can bring it under their gaze. For example, there were some, I think it was at Marquette recently, there was a young woman who was accepted and then was told not to come by the administration because of her racist remarks in social media. Things like that can get out there and haunt you. And some people might say, well, good, that's the way it should work. But there's all sorts of much more innocuous stuff that we do that, and going back to Sartre, anything that we do can be interpreted in ways that we wouldn't want it interpreted by somebody else who's brought us within their gaze, right? They can turn us into an object that we're not happy with.
Right. And so I want to go a little bit back to like the surveillance society in that. Like,
yeah.
It used to be that like
you want to take a look at it, right?
Yeah. That London was kind of like the poster child because they had put up such a large amount of CCTVs.
Right. Yeah.
But they're all like kind of manned by humans.
Yeah.
So there's like people like, big old banks of cameras, and you're just watching that, or you can like play back if you had like someone say like there was a crime at this one time and place.
Yeah.
But that's kind of nothing compared to the advent of our, at least AIs that are allowed to like create object detection. They're literally objectifying people through programmatic algorithms, and then also like I guess to take China as an example, applying like social scores to them. So it's not just like your peers or your close neighbors or families that are watching and objectifying you, but the entire society.
Yeah, we should. So for our listeners who don't know what we're talking about there, it's called the social credit system. right? And it's been around for a while, and it was optional at first, but optional in the sense like everybody should volunteer, and if you don't, you're going to stick out like a sore thumb. What do you have to lose if you don't do it? And it was tied in. So imagine if your Facebook account and Twitter and whatever other social media, Instagram, were also connected with your school records, connected with your work HR records,
your banking records,
banking, your travel stuff,
how well you are a good neighbor and or partner to any of your relationships.
Maybe even like when it comes to school records, how your kids are doing. Too,
oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, right.
And so this is all placed into one big system, which determines things like, are you okay to travel from province to province? Or are you, one of those people they should keep an eye on? We have, quite a few networks, but fortunately our networks are not well integrated like this. This is something like out of a sci-fi movie, but it's building its way into active existence, and that may be an issue for us here as well.
Yeah. We're always building systems that are like a little bit more and more integrated, and there are some states and cities that have proactively said like we're not going to do any like facial recognition, but there's so much like want from potential policing or whatnot to actually have these systems in place that I feel like eventually, unless there's some really hard pushback, these systems are going to be implemented.
And let me ask you, because you're more of a tech guy than I am in many different ways. So the big tech companies, we think about the big five: Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple. All of them have these kind of hegemonic desires to control everything. They often frame it in very nice ways, like, oh, we just want to be involved in every area of your life, and make your life wonderful. But when you watch them fighting against each other, it's clear that they're trying to dominate space. And so just like is with like the food and beverage industry, so many of the other things that we're used to using belong to these companies. So Microsoft owns Skype and owns LinkedIn and owns a whole bunch of other things as well. Google, a whole variety of things, right? From YouTube to the search engine to Google Suite that we use in all the educational institutions that I work, and we could go on and on and on, right? Amazon, in this case, has the doorbell thing. Is that Link?
Ring.
Ring, yeah.
They serve like 2/3 of the internet with AWS, and they own Whole Foods, and there's so many touch places where they can gather more information to create a better profile of you.
And that's exactly what they've been doing, right? We are objects for these big tech companies. And, I kind of, so here, I'm going to throw this out and I want to see you run with it. You brought up like police wanting to have surveillance powers. It seems like where the real catalyst for that would be these big tech companies that have these things in place and then could like turn them over to policing. So we might not end up with one vast single system of social credit, but maybe we end up with something that's like a piecemeal one.
Like my Google score or my Amazon score.
Yeah. I mean, does that seem, what do you think? Is that something, a dystopian future that we have to look out for? Or?
I think it is, especially because it seems like in the last decade or so, the biggest revenue generator is to create the closest models for each individual user in order to serve them, targeted ads.
Yeah,
and that is like the major profit generator for the vast majority of these companies that are data first, which like all these big five are to greater or lesser extent kind of data first organizations. And if at some point in time, if the government wants to start building these things, they already have it like ready served, and we're entering into these arrangements with these companies through just like, contract law, which doesn't, apply to like the Fourth Amendment. And once it's, out there and someone has it, they can, potentially give it over to the government, because it wasn't the government that was searching and seizing that, but it was given to someone else, third party, through your own free will, quotation marks.
Yeah. That's interesting. So we inhabit a very different environment, you could say, one that's mediated through vast server banks and algorithms and things like that, way beyond what Sartre was worried about, or even maybe Michel Foucault. He died back in the early 80s. He could see some of the writing on the wall, but certainly not anything like where we are now.
Right. We kind of live in a some of the sci-fi writers' like greatest worries, but we're like, hey, it's fun. I get my packages in 2 days, and I've got all the things on the internet, all the world's knowledge, and all the world's comedy and stupidity all at my fingertips. It's really fun.
Yeah, that's true. Well, there's a devil's bargain there, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, before we run out of time, and maybe we come back to Sartre later if we have the time, but let's talk about the male gaze, because I know that was something that was motivating you to talk about this in the first place. This isn't a radically new concept. I think Simone de Beauvoir is talking about something like this in The Second Sex, and others were before. But the term the male gaze is kind of new, or relatively new. I mean, older than you, just a little bit, younger than me. So,
so like at least within film theory, it's this idea of most film, at least in the 70s when this idea was being proposed, that we have three major gazes of that: the perspective of the man behind the camera, the perspective of the male characters in the film story, and the perspective of the male spectator gazing at the movie and images as the major audiences for the type of images that are being shown. And it's like what is pleasing to that male eye, and mostly it is reducing a female to an object of desire, specifically sexual.
Yeah. And this is, again, something that has been going on for a very long time. That notion sex sells in advertising was a way of expressing this, I would say. And, there's a book called The Hidden Persuaders written back in the 50s that goes into this in great depth, using psychoanalysis to explain it. I kind of think, as you were talking about that, you see this a lot in the 70s. You see this a lot in the 80s and the movies there. And I don't think it's changed all that much in movies. It's still pretty male gaze centered. There's some notable exceptions, and there's sometimes like turning the tide, like, think about the movie The Full Monty, where women get to look at naked guys, or,
female gaze.
Yeah. And people talk about that, but some people say, well, the female gaze is basically just like changing the male gaze around. It's still the same structure. Somebody's looking at somebody else and objectifying them.
Yeah, just to continue with that, like to objectify someone as a object of desire, of ownership, of something to be won as a competition for prestige or for dominance.
Yeah. So, what do you make of this? Is this connected with Sartre's view of the gaze, or is this something additional? Does this tie in at all with the worries that we were expressing about panopticonism and surveillance? I kind of see these as interconnected myself.
I would agree, especially because not only does it reinforce kind of certain notions of what a woman should be, but also for the woman it creates the object or the idea of like, well, what should I be if this is the idea of the ideal? Do I need to modify myself in order to placate these things,
or hide parts of myself, or
right? Which is, I guess, male centered instead of like, my own subject centered.
Yeah. So what do we mean by subject centered in that case? That's a really important idea. And it connects back to existentialism, this notion that you aren't just an object. You aren't just what people see you as or classify you as. You're also a
subject.
Yeah. What is it? So what is being a subject? What does that mean?
I would defer to the professor at the moment.
Okay. I was looking to elicit some springboard. I mean, part of it is I guess you could say part of it is the capacity to choose for yourself how you want to be looked at, right? I mean, you can't define yourself totally. And I think the existentialists are right about this. You can't like say, well, I'm, a 51-year-old kind of out of shape guy. Everyone should look at me as if I'm a 21-year-old Greek god statue. That's ridiculous. Or I want everyone to see me as a 5'1" Frenchman with a beret, even though I'm not wearing a beret. Okay, there's some things that are ridiculous that way, but I do think that there is a lot of putting people into categories and defining them, and this does work along power differentials. So that means that it does work along matters of class or authority, or in this case, gender. And so today we still have a lot of schools where, take, for example, dress codes. This is a prime example of worries about the gaze. In middle schools and high schools, my own oldest daughter used to complain about this a lot. There's this emphasis on girls not wearing revealing clothing because that draws the male gaze and can distract them, can provoke reactions. And there's very little holding of the male students accountable for the fact that they can direct where they want their eyeballs to go, Right. And a lot of things that are okay for male students to get away wearing aren't considered okay for female students. I would say that that's an expression of this. And interestingly, it's not just men who are imposing this. It's also, women principals and women teachers and, mothers and people like that who are enforcing these notions of modesty that Mary Wollstonecraft kind of blew up back in the, 1790s.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it, being able to have some stake in how you're going to be looked at. But I mean, there's more to it.
And part of that is like the roles that you're presented with as, at least,
right.
Looking at what is acceptable in society and the roles that you are given as a position within that society, and kind of like this kind of brings up the Bechdel test, which is the idea of like, in this old idea, like there's like you're either a wife or like a object of desire, or you're
or a secretary, right?
Yeah, and most of these films and TV don't have any women that actually just talk to each other about things that weren't like about a man. And so the Bechdel test has three parts of it. You have to have at least two women, named women specifically, in the piece, who talk to each other about something besides a man. And that is like a minimum to bringing someone out of this, very narrow kind of myopic view of what women can be in this media.
Yeah, and so that affects film and television. I guess we could say it also affects maybe radio, depending on what the show is oriented towards. I also kind of think that in our So, we brought up this digital age that we're in with mobile technology and, an internet that is spread over the entire world and exists, everywhere and nowhere. So, images that people have of gender relations, and particularly sexuality, we get quite distorted views through, things like say, mainstream pornography, right? But also equally through advertising. And it's, it's still pretty widespread. That's not radically changing. And it leads to a lot of miserable people. And this kind of comes back to Jean-Paul Sartre's view of the gays. We could view it as like a call to responsibility. He's got that famous thing of you're looking through the keyhole and you're like, he says, out of vice, jealousy or curiosity, right? So you're looking at somebody doing something that, you're not supposed to be watching. And then suddenly you hear somebody behind you and he says, it could, maybe it's not somebody, it's just a floor creaking, but you're tense suddenly, right?
Because now you're the object of someone else's subjectivity.
Exactly. And so there's a lot of this, looking at other people, but also then measuring ourselves in relation to that. And so, unrealistic ideas about what we should look like in terms of our nether parts, have been an issue. But also, interestingly enough, people have been reporting this, the rate of young men having body dysmorphia and like going to the gym and working out a lot and still feeling like they're not big enough. They're not defined enough. I'd say that's come about because of the internet age as well. And something else that we were talking about before we started the show, there has been a recent boom in plastic surgery since the pandemic. Why is that? Well, people are seeing themselves, and they're seeing themselves as they would be seeing themselves through the eyes of another, through Zoom, Skype, Google Meet. I don't know what else other people use for video conferencing. Dan, you would know more than I would.
What's it? There's Jitsi, there's Microsoft Teams, there's a number of others.
Yeah, there you go. I think I blanked out on Microsoft Teams because I dislike using it so much. But people have been seeing themselves in these meetings, and then they think, I should get some plastic surgery. I don't look as good as I should. Now, are they coming to that idea just by themselves, or are they doing that because they're looking at themselves through the eyes of others and finding themselves not to be good enough?
Could be both. Could be people actually saying something, or like this whole just always seeing and being seen.
Yeah.
In a way that we would not in a normal interaction.
We don't really know. All we do know is that the industry, plastic surgery, is worried that the boom is going to end as people move back into like offices. So that's an interesting thing to cap it all off, I'd say.
Or we've just created a whole new generation of narcissists.
I hope not, because narcissists are high maintenance, right? And who's got the energy for that?
Not me. Got too much going on.
Yeah, me too. I don't want a classroom full of narcissists myself.
No.
Well, should we wrap it up? What do you think?
Yeah. So today, we leave you with the words of Jean-Paul Sartre. Man is always separated from what he is by all the breadth of being which he is not.